Friday night, 6 o'clock, and I hate you.
I know. I'm like feeling not guilty, but just really fortunate that I'm on the California coast. Yesterday I did a 4 hour ride yesterday and I had to wear gloves.
Oh gosh, now I really hate you. Wow.
It, it's honestly we're in paradise. I understand that this week they canceled Morro Bay for next year,
Yeah, they did.
and
Yeah, that's
yeah,
too
and I really think it's so sad because that's where I'm just north of there, and
bad.
this is such a beautiful area.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's such a good place to come and train, and it's really sad that what happened apparently translated into the canceling of that race, because this
hmm
is a really special place. So
Yeah. No, that
unfortunately.
is too bad. You always hate when a race goes away, when it has potential to be a good race, and so that's unfortunate. I don't know what the reasoning was behind um, the cancellation. It could be a number of different factors, but it is always too bad. It's hard to uh, not think that it was related to the fiasco of the swim.
Well, considering they sold it out, the first 2 years of it, it sold out, and oftentimes we hear of the races
Yeah.
going away because of lower numbers.
hmm
But when a race is selling out, you'd think that they'd continue it. And I know the contract, I think, was for 3 years.
Oh, I'm not sure. Yeah,
That's what
that's
somebody
usually what they
somebody
do.
yeah, somebody here was saying that.
Yeah.
Obviously, like I'm here, I'm talking to people at the swimming
Yeah.
pool, and people at the swimming pool were quite disappointed. And there were people that raced it this year even, and I said, well, yeah, they screwed up with the swim this year, but
hmm
the adjustments could have been made,
Yeah. Yeah.
and obviously nobody knows for sure.
Right. Yeah. Right. Right. No, I mean, you can fix the problem. Just look at the tide pool schedule.
Well, I wonder if they were tied into that exact date. It had to be like the third Sunday of the year, and that was the
Yeah.
contract. And they're like, looked at the tides for next year, and like it's going to be just as bad or worse next year.
Maybe. Yeah. Right. Right. Maybe there wasn't a way to get around that tide
Yeah.
issue and
Well, if they're
guarantee
trying
that
to
people
tie
could swim.
the tide schedule to maybe the road closure times,
Yeah.
because they closed down the main highway,
Mm-hmm.
or sections of the main highway for significant amount of time. And I literally wonder if it's just logistically they couldn't tie the two together. But yeah,
Oh
it
yeah.
is unfortunate because people from Vegas, it wasn't that, it's a 6.5 hour drive to
Yeah.
get here. It's not like super hard to get.
No, no. And the thing about putting on an event like that, I mean, a lot of people don't know the logistics that go into putting on a major event like that. Even our little tri club event, there's, issues that we need to deal with that a lot of people won't see, but they saw some of it because we had to move the date of our July 7th event to July 14th because the national park said, "Oh wait, we have a blackout date for that weekend because of July 4th." And so we're only finding out about that a week ahead of time, and you got to adjust, because you can't put the race on without permits. No, it's there's a lot of
Absolutely.
things that happen to pull off any event, and let alone a major event like that.
Yeah. I think that as athletes, we oftentimes discount, how difficult it is. And
hmm
that actually reminds me, and I know we're on the air now to talk about this, but I think we should get a race director on our
Yeah,
podcast
yeah,
and
yeah,
talk about some of those things, right? And some of the
yeah,
logistics that they have to deal with that we don't, as athletes, understand when we are, we're always very quick to complain.
yeah. hmm
Oh, this and this has been better, and this they should have done this, and you know, but from their perspective, how difficult it really is.
Right, right. Yeah. And sometimes the last minute decisions that you need to make as a race director,
Yeah,
based upon whatever the situation is, whether it's weather or environmental issues or what have you. But it's or sometimes a road closure or accident on the road that you're going to race on, and you've got all of a sudden adjust the course. So there's a lot. Yeah, we could bring on. We know a couple of race directors.
yeah,
So
I think it'd be good
yeah,
to do.
yeah.
Yeah, what do you do when there's a bear on the run course, right?
Wait, say again? Oh,
What do you do when there's a bear on the run course?
oh, well, that was the bike course, but
Oh, it's bike course. No,
yeah.
but I've heard of another one. There was a bear on the run course. It was a race in Canada,
Oh
and
yeah.
they had to completely change the. And they're like, well, yeah, like you can't have people running where there's active bear activity, right? Like,
No. Yeah, no, I thought you were referring to my Western Massachusetts last year where
right.
we ran
We had the bear
right
on
across
the
the.
run. Yeah. But even Ironman Alaska, when they had it that one
Yeah,
year, they had
that's
bears
right.
on the bike course, and
That's right.
and we talked about it before. It doesn't happen obviously where we live very much, but like in Australia with the
Sharks.
sharks,
Yeah, right.
right? And even Africa, South Africa, they've had issues with sharks. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, how does a race director like actually really think through these things
Yeah.
and think through like the safety of the athlete? And
Mm-hmm.
there's going to be people disappointed when the swims get canceled
Yeah.
or or get shortened or run courses get changed at the last minute or bike courses get changed. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
Let's get a race director on.
Yeah, and then we not to get too deep into this, but then the Olympics, whether or not there's going to be a swim for the
Right.
triathlon because of the water quality, and so that's an issue. And but I've gone to races. I think of Ironman Louisville for one, where we weren't sure if the swim was going to happen because of water quality, and you have to just wait and hope that the race director makes the right decision based upon the information he or she has, and keeps everybody safe that way and healthy.
No, I would always back a race director if they're making the decision for health and
Hmm.
safety,
Yeah.
right? Even if it's like a small percent chance something bad is going to happen, I still think you got to kind of back that person. And I've heard once again negative people make negative comments about race directors making these hard decisions.
Hmm.
Even thinking back to like Ironman California when it got
Yeah.
canceled, I was so disappointed. But that was the right decision on the day.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Right. And the people that were complaining and say, "Oh, we should race Iron Man's too soft," and
Hmm.
all these things, it's like, well, you don't like you don't understand. Like they have to think of like the least qualified athlete, basically, or the
Yeah.
least capable athlete, and is it going to be safe for them?
Hmm.
Like, and I agree. I think
Yeah.
that as a community, we're usually good, but there's always the outliers that complain on on social media and
Yeah. Sometimes you just can't win it one way or the other. You're not gonna be satisfying everybody. So
absolutely. Well, John, tonight let's talk about carbon shoes
yeah.
and carbon running shoes and running and maybe some myths around them. And we're going to talk a little bit about the gait cycle. Rick Simpson, who always listens to our show, he asked me a few questions this week about carbon shoes, and I wrote him a nice email back about them. And I was like, well, this would be actually be a good topic. And I know we talked about carbon shoes before,
Right.
but there's been some emerging science, and the carbon shoes are continuing to evolve.
Hmm.
It's been what 6 years since the Nike 4%
Yeah.
uh, was the first shoe that came out, and now everybody, every not everybody, but every shoe company seems to be in the game,
Yep.
and there's different iterations of the carbon shoes, and some interesting information that I've come across from some high level people is that right now there's probably about only a 1% difference between like all of the shoe brands.
Right.
And where in the beginning there were definitely with Nike there was
Oh, Nike. Yeah. They stormed the
they were
market.
well
Yeah. Hmm.
they're well ahead. And then we're going to get into this too, but there are responders and non-responders to each brand of shoe.
Yeah.
And you might respond really well to a Nike, I might
Hmm.
go a Hoka, and I might get more benefit out of that shoe versus another shoe. And some people really respond well, and some, or they'll get 6 or 7% gain
Hmm.
in running economy. Some people might only get 1% gain in running
Hmm.
economy. So that being said, John, I wanted to start off talking about just running in general. And I posed this to you off the air, and you said, "Oh my gosh, this is a big topic." But in general, John, what's the role of a running shoe in running?
Oh,
And I guess even bigger, like, why do we wear running shoes?
yeah. Well, you don't have to.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is interesting. Actually, I had a similar question from someone who's writing a story for National Geographic. So we'll see if that story comes out. And I had a long talk with her. I'll try to do more pausing in this podcast. But let me start by saying the shoe often gets far too much credit for preventing injuries, and it gets far too much blame for causing injuries.
Oh,
So
that's so interesting because we hear both.
you do, that's right. And the vast majority of our injuries, our overuse injuries during running, are because of training errors. And so that is something that we always got to keep in mind, that if I try a new shoe, that's something that changed, and that may be a training error to run 6 miles I had planned to run in my typical shoes, or I changed how fast I'm running, or I changed something. And often that training change is a training error, and all of a sudden we're stressing structures in a way that they're not used to, and that leads to an overuse injury. So I think that's sort of the crux of the issue. And so now, what's a shoe? Well, a shoe is nothing more than just something that covers the foot. And it doesn't even need to cover the whole foot. It's just some sole, something that you put on the bottom of your shoe, or your bottom of your foot, and then you have some connection to your foot to hold that bottom on. That's all a shoe is. So a lot of people may say that's a sandal. Well, it's the same thing. It's a shoe. A shoe is broadly defined to incorporate a whole host of different types of things. A running shoe is simply that device that we then use while we're running. And it does not need to be what we think about in terms of running shoes. It doesn't have to be this. It just needs to be something that's on the bottom of the foot and some connection to the top of the foot to hold that bottom on. And so that's what a shoe is. But what's happened is we've developed these running shoes over time from incorporating some ideas about what could be causative factors to running injuries, and then also trying to create a tool that would be helpful to run faster or further. And so often a primary function of a shoe is to protect the body and the foot from that impact with the ground. So we bring our foot forward, we strike the ground, and that can be a high impact situation, and it's a highly repetitive situation too. We do it over and over and over and over again, 5,000 foot strikes in 30 minutes, something like that. And that repetitive nature and that high force situation has always been thought to be a causative factor of overuse injuries. It's probably still true, but there's a lot of things that go into it. And so some of the original running shoes were built with the idea to put a structure on the bottom of the foot to mitigate some of that impact. And that's that cushioning. That's why the heel has some material here. In the beginning, it was a real simple type of foam, and now, your shoes that we have now are a little bit more complicated, but it's the same concept. You're trying to protect the foot and the body from an impact. And then the other part of the shoe is to help with some type of propulsion, or give you an ability to push off the ground in order to run faster. And so those are the primary functions of the shoe, is to protect and to help us run faster, or just be able to sustain running for a longer period of time. But again, I'll go back to the idea that you don't need to run in a shoe. You can run in bare feet, and there's people who have done that very successfully. Zola Budd, great Olympian who ran barefoot on track. I had the fun of tracking Barefoot Bob as he did the Las Vegas Marathon here years and years ago, and following him around the course and going along with the Canadian Broadcast Company on tracking him, and he ran the marathon in bare feet. And then so you don't need to wear shoes, but you're not going to run barefoot in Vegas in the summer for sure.
Yeah, you're not going to walk in Vegas in the summer.
No, that's right.
So, John, let me ask you a question. So the running shoe kind of came into the world in the 70s, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, I think it was probably like mid 80s, we started to see the shoe that kind of looks like what we have now.
Yeah.
So my question is this: have running injury rates really decreased that much?
No, thank you for saying that, because no, the runners still get injured. And
Exactly. At a very high rate.
yeah, that's right. At a very high rate. They're overuse type injuries. and they are very similar over time as well. And that's why I say the shoe often gets too much credit for minimizing risk of injury, and it often gets too much blame. Because like you said earlier, you get people saying both things, that their shoe is a causative factor of injury because it changes the way we run. And others will say, well, it's, built to protect our, foot from injury and our body from injury.
I do think it's interesting that we associate the running shoe with injury so much. And why I brought that up is because now it's the same thing. If I took a shoe from the 80s and I took a shoe from today, the highest end racing shoes,
Hmm.
they are faster.
Hmm. Yeah.
Without a doubt, we know that, right? Like when we can test people on treadmills, we can look at it like they're more efficient, they're faster. World records are being broken. Mostly, a lot of it's being attributed to the shoes, not really attributed to the training differences. Like the percentage difference is just is too great. But you're right. Like I think we get this conflated with, well, and we're going to be protecting from injury more as technology gets better. But in reality, if I have a shoe company, I'm probably more about getting you faster because people, in general, will pay for performance.
Hmm.
Very few people pay for prevention of injury,
Yeah, that's true. And
right?
and when your prevention of injury really should be treating running as an impact sport. And if you do that, then you'll have the best chance of minimizing the risk of overuse injuries. And so I'm not even saying have the right shoe,
Yep.
but whatever shoe you run in, you've got to then treat yourself after a run as an impact sport, and you've got to recover. And you can't make changes that are that dramatic because running is such a high impact sport, regardless of what you're wearing. Barefoot, if you run forefoot, heel strike, it doesn't matter. It's still an impact sport. And if you start making changes too quickly, you start to expose different structures to stress that it may not be used to. And that's where you'll start seeing some overuse injuries.
So I love this topic, and I'm going to just share a little bit of an anecdote, which I tend to do. So after my surgery last year and coming back, and running has been the hardest thing to get back, and partly because I keep getting injured. And I think that part of the injury we talked about, some of the situations I've had with other health issues, but my cardiovascular system responded pretty well to getting back to training,
Hmm.
but my musculotendinous system hasn't.
Yeah.
And I was still able to go out and run 10K or 12K cardiovascularly, no problem.
Hmm.
And even like I feel like the muscular system I was able to do it. I was tired at the end.
Hmm.
My tendons weren't used to the load and the impact,
Yeah.
right? And so in my rehab TED 2.0, where I'm at right now, I'm dropping all the way back. Like I'm doing like 4 mile runs, 5 mile runs,
Hmm.
and I'm feeling like I'm trying to really feel where that line is, like
Hmm.
not pushing into pain,
Yeah.
not pushing too far. And yes, I know I just raced a 70.3 like 10 days ago and 21K, but my longest run before that was 11K,
Right.
right? And I'm treating it like that. Like, hey, this is an impact thing.
Yeah.
And I've got to be very conscious of not overloading that
Hmm.
musculotendinous system past where it's able
Yeah.
to do right now,
Yeah.
not where I could do 4 years ago,
Yeah.
6 years ago, or even a year ago. I need to
Hmm.
look at it where I am today,
Hmm.
and no shoe in the world is going to be the one that's like allows me to go and go do 15Ks on a regular basis like I used to do. Now I over time I can build that up. The shoe's not going to be the thing that gets me there. It's
Yeah.
going to be patience
Hmm.
and deliberateness about not overdoing it.
No, I love that
Uh,
you've told this anecdote, and what you said is so true. We could put a shoe on you that absorbs 90% of the impact energy, but that
yep.
doesn't mean you're not going to get injured.
Right.
Because the run in that type of shoe, your running style will change quite dramatically. We did some research years ago where we looked at these spring boots, which had big springs on the bottom of these boots that look like rollerblade boots. But the idea was to take away that impact. And when we looked at ground reaction forces, when we looked at how hard the foot was hitting the ground, we saw, well, there's a change in impact. But the way people were running on those really soft shoes was quite different than running in normal shoes. And so again, yeah, now you've changed something. You've changed the way the stress is hitting different structures, and ultimately, I think what we were hypothesizing was people were going to have back problems if they ran in these
Oh,
really super soft shoe because the knee was not going through flexion during stance. It was just the knee was just
wow.
super stiff, and wasn't even going, wasn't bending at all, if you will. So, yeah. So whatever shock there was would have been transmitted all the way up to the back.
Even though, yeah, because like you still have the initial ground reaction force that has to be
That's right.
dissipated somewhere.
Yeah. And a lot of people think, yeah, think about jumping on a trampoline. You know, a lot of times you get off the trampoline, what hurts? It's not your legs, it's often your back.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
that trampoline's so soft that your legs are really, they're just trying to be this stiff piston to be able to compress the spring of the trampoline. And so your back is then undergoing a different amount of compression that it would normally.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I think that's a really good place to start. So let's talk about, John, we've never really done this in the show. Let's talk about the phases of the running gait.
Hmm.
And if you can, maybe in each phase, talk about what the shoe does
Okay.
during, in particular on the ground. Obviously, in
Yeah,
the
yeah,
air, the shoe's not doing anything,
yeah.
I hope.
But that's actually one of the important factors in shoe design is what happens when you're swinging that foot
It's
forward.
true. It's
Yeah.
true.
So phases of gait. Well, first we probably need to just say there's some descriptors that we need to define: step and stride. A step is what happens when we look at movements between right and left, left and right. A stride is what all the movements that we look at when we look at one side. So we look at one stride being right foot contact to the next right foot contact, something along that lines. And then when we take that stride, which is typically the way that we do it in research, steps are fine to look at, but it's a little better to look at a whole stride, a cycle of what one side goes through. And we'll compare left and right sides, but for purposes of research and a lot of the papers that are out there, we use stride as a basic kinematic descriptor of gait. And so we have to define a stride from some what we call a discrete event or something that happens in a really short period of time. Or I like to think about it as if I'm looking at a video frame by frame by frame, I'll be I won't see that event, whatever that event is, and then I'll see that event on the next frame. That's a discrete event. So we typically use something like heel strike or foot strike in some sense as a discrete event to start a stride. It doesn't have to be heel strike or it doesn't have to be foot strike. We could use toe off. We could use some other metrics as well, but typically it's some measure of the foot striking the ground because it's not in contact with the ground and then all of a sudden it's in contact with the ground. Whatever part of the foot is striking the ground first, that would be ground contact. And then the stride, then we have what we call stance phase, and that's the phase that occurs between where the foot strikes, when the foot strikes the ground to when the foot leaves the ground, which would typically be a toe off. And so that would be a stance phase of a stride. And then from
So,
the,
John,
yeah,
let me break in. So we got heel strike, stance, toe off.
mm-hmm,
Those are the three main pieces we're talking about. Just to clarify, because once again, when you read a lot of this stuff and you read even Runner's World magazine, they talk about toe off, they talk about, and really it's just those three simple things, right? Initial strike,
yeah,
stance, toe off.
yeah,
Is that correct?
that's right. So initial
Okay,
strike is
thank
a
you.
discrete event. Stance phase is everything that happens in that period of time from that initial strike to when the foot leaves the ground. That's the stance
Yep.
phase. Or if you look on some of your Garmin metrics, because you see contact time, that's stance
Yes.
phase time. That's how long the foot's in contact with the ground. All right.
Perfect. That's a really good descriptor because yeah, a lot of people can see that metric on their watch
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
and see that okay, that's the amount of time from heel strike to toe off.
Yep, yep. Just the moment that the foot hits the ground, whatever it hits, it could be heel, it could be midfoot, it could be the side of the, it could be, striking over here, it could be striking over here. Wherever it hits, that's the beginning of stance. And then toe off, typically toe off would be the last part in contact with the ground. And so
So I got to really I have a really distinct question for you here, and this is a good biomechanics question. How can my watch tell?
How did your watch tell? Well, the work that we've done is very similar to what Garmin and other devices do, and that is looking at acceleration profiles. And so when you look at acceleration profiles, it doesn't matter if I'm hitting the ground here, here, or here, I see a sudden change in acceleration. All right. And
Right.
that spike is really easy to go in and pick out and say, oh, okay, that's the foot, something just happened pretty dramatically. And that's the time that the foot hits the ground. And then there's some other very characteristic phases as the tibia starts to rotate forward, the foot starts to come up. There's another very low frequency blip, if you will, in the acceleration profile, and you can pick out toe off that way as well.
But
And
it's to me, it's crazy. Like my watch is up on my arm.
yeah, yeah,
I get it if I had with the old days, you had the run pods, the
yeah.
foot pod that I could pick this up. But how does it pick it up in my arm?
Well, some people have the accelerometer, some companies will have the accelerometer in the heart rate monitor. That's a little easier to pick up on the wrist. You still have these sudden jolting movements
Oh
that
yeah.
happen when you hit that ground. That's how much impact is happening, and it causes everything. So I used to put an accelerometer for my dissertation and other work when I came here at UNLV. I'd put an accelerometer on the head, and I could pick out the phases of gait based upon the acceleration profile all the way up here. So
Yeah.
that shock, you hit the ground, that shock goes right up through the body. And we call it a shock wave because it's literally that. It's a wave of propagation going up through your body. Now, if you ever miss a step, you ever do that and you feel that jolt, that's the shock wave that you haven't attenuated through your lower extremity because your knee isn't responding the right way, and this shock wave of energy just goes right up your body.
And it's a lot of energy.
It's a lot of energy. That's right, and that's happening every foot strike. It's happening every foot strike, and if you're doing 80 strides a minute, now that's one side. You run for 30 minutes, 30 times 80, that's 2,400 impacts. If you multiply that times two, because you have two legs, you're having that
All
many
right, so I'm gonna go off on a
impacts.
tangent again. I'm
No,
gonna go off
that's
on
why
a
I told
tangent
you
again.
we can, we can
This
go
is
down.
this is good. No, this is good. This is why people like to listen to our talk.
All right, so
So I
now
do.
now the toe leaves the ground. This is one other phase that I want to define, and that's the swing
Okay.
phase. Now you're bringing your the right side. We're talking about the right side. That right foot is now being swung forward, and then the swing phase will end when the next stride begins. Now, as you're there's a just a couple of things when we start looking left right. Uh, Running is often defined as where you would have a period where neither foot is in contact with the ground. And so we have what we would call a flight phase. And, and neither foot's touching the ground. You're flying through the air as a projectile, and then the next foot hits the ground. That's in its stance phase. Then you have a toe off, and then you have another flight phase. It doesn't have to be that long, but it is there. The problem is that's not always true. And especially when we start running slower, we have a period of time where both feet are in contact with the ground. Now that's walking typically, but another way to think about running is that we have this characteristic up and down, up and down, up and down movement. And during running, we would say your center of mass, or that single point that's sort of around your hip region, is at its lowest point at the middle part of stance phase. Okay. And then it's at the highest point when you're at toe off, or if you're having some flight phase, it could actually be higher when you're flying in the air. Whereas walking at that mid stance, your center of mass is actually the highest point. So that's how we often distinguish between running and walking rather than flight phase. We say that running is the center of mass is still going to be lowest at the midpoint of your stance phase. And so that, but that comes back to another Garmin metric, which is vertical oscillation. and tracking that up and down movement is what the devices will do.
Wow. These accelerometers are amazing. And the
Well,
data
yeah,
and the data they're collecting, like on every foot
yeah,
strike.
yeah.
Like it's to me, this is like
Hmm.
mind-boggling how much information. I think it's information we take for granted,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know. Okay. So that was really good. So now let's talk about these fancy shoes. And what do you think is happening in these phases? And this is once again, we did not prepare much for this. So just is more your opinion of what do you think is happening to basically improve our running economy? Because
Uh-oh.
that's what we're talking about, or
Okay.
even the flight phase.
Yeah, you just froze there for a second, but I think I got it. So, all right. So here's the deal with the Super Shield. We don't actually know why running economy is better or why you're able to run faster. There's some ideas. At the end of the day, it's most likely a combination of the foam that's in the shoe and the stiffness of the carbon plate that's in the shoes. It's not one or the other. It's probably how the two are working together. And there's another complicating factor, and that's me running in the shoe. How I run may take advantage of the way their shoe's designed, or it may take away from the way their shoe's designed. So it's actually really not an easy thing to come back and say, here's why you can run faster, or here's why you can run with better running economy, or here's why this shoe will be better for shock absorption, because there's different factors that come into play to it.
Okay. So then here's question one from Rick, basically.
Hmm.
Is it possible or probable someone would run worse in a carbon plate shoe?
So far, the research that I've seen, no one's really running worse in the super shoes. And that was something that I know you and I talked about early on, is that maybe the slower runners would actually not would actually be worse off being in the super shoe. And so one of the issues, and given that we did the gait cycle, that shoe is hitting the ground typically in something like a heel strike, or maybe a midfoot strike, maybe a forefoot strike. But if you're a forefoot striker, this is not the right shoe for you, because it's not taking advantage of the way that you're running. But you're trying to absorb that impact energy, and then you're trying to change the direction of that and timing of that impact energy to help propel the foot forward. And that's not an easy thing to actually happen with the way the shoe is even designed today. And I think that this is why we'll continue to see advances in shoes. But for the research I've looked at, I've not seen situations where someone's getting worse in running in the shoes. Now, the problem is that we don't always see the individual data sets
Right.
from a study. And so if we look at a study and it will say there's 4% improvement, usually that means most of the people improved, but there may be one or two people who got worse. And we're not seeing that reporting yet in the papers. And that's why I really like the papers that illustrate individual data sets. And it's still really hard at this point to see. But we do, the data that we have seen so far, probably 1 in 3 people won't benefit from a super shoe, but it won't make them
Okay.
worse.
So once again, now this is more anecdotal, and like once again, like listening to coaching podcasts and stuff like that, and they're reporting that some people are actually having worse running economy.
Oh, good. Who
And
you? Okay.
and this is once again just coaching podcasts,
Mhm.
and but it was once again it's very few people, and it's usually just one particular shoe. Like they tested the
Yeah.
Adidas versus the Saucony versus this, and one shoe actually made them worse than their basic training model.
Hmm.
And rightfully so. Like if you think of it, if there's now thousands of people out running in these shoes, you're always going to have outliers. Like their particular shoe architect or foot architecture, their particular biomechanics. Once again, you talked about. You said, well, if they're a 4-foot striker,
Mm-hmm.
The design of the shoe is not built
No.
around that. So once again, they're a 4-foot striker. They're very easily could be worse,
Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm.
right? In the shoe because it's not built for like a big 4-foot strike.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be interesting to see like some shoe design around this type of foam set up specifically for people that are 4-foot strikers. So I think it's possible. Like I think that once again, answering the question, is it possible? Yeah.
Yeah.
Is the data in the big studies showing it? No, not yet.
No,
But I
and I'm
think that
glad you
there are
brought up.
probably once again there's outliers. The other one is if the shoe's just not comfortable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm glad you brought
Sorry,
that that.
if the shoe's just not comfortable for you,
Mm-hmm. Sorry, we get a funny lag.
you know, if the sorry, sorry, yeah, if the shoe's not comfortable for you, then no matter what, you're not going to be. I don't think you're going to be much faster, right?
Yeah.
If you don't like it, if it doesn't
Right.
feel good under your foot,
Yeah.
you're probably not going to be very efficient.
Yeah, no, totally. And I'm glad you brought this podcast information up because that's important information. But this is where the research world sometimes, well, it's lagging in terms of what's happening in the real world because it takes a long time to get a study done and approved and ultimately published. And so I do agree with you. I think that there are going to be situations where people will actually run worse in certain shoes. That's just not showing up yet in the publications.
Okay, so the next question is: do carbon plate shoes sometimes require a different technique?
Yeah, so what we do know, and this is pretty clear in the literature, that if you run in this shoe versus, I could go over and grab another one, but a training shoe, you're going to run different.
Yep.
How much different, I don't know. But that goes back into the issue of how different the shoes are, as well as what my original running style is and what my running experience is. But and like I talked about with running in those really super spring boots, you really change the way you run in that type of spring boot or extreme shoe. And so you will run differently running in a shoe like this versus a normal trainer. How much differently? I don't know. But it could be foot strike is a little bit different. Knee flexion during stance phase may be a little bit different. Your stride rate may be different. How long your stride is going to be could be different. How much? It's hard to actually tell.
Okay, so I also think another piece in that is your pace,
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's really efficient
Mm-hmm.
for you at an 8-minute mile.
Yeah,
But when you switch down, like you're doing your Ironman, and you're like, oh my gosh, like my last half of my Ironman, I'm doing 11-minute mile.
yeah,
It could be significantly different in your technique,
yeah.
right? Or if you're running a 5K and you're doing 6-minute miles,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think that it's a big question to really think about. Because I really think like I run differently when I put those shoes on.
Yeah.
And as I get ready for a race, I use them more.
Mm-hmm.
I want to
Mm-hmm.
get the feel for the difference. And even if it's subtle, it still is different.
Yeah.
And we know that different can actually be a bad thing.
Mm-hmm. Right. At least initially, that
Initially.
change. Yeah.
Exactly.
So, and I'm glad you're bringing this up because I know Rick reads the research and he's very well read in that area. And this is probably good for to go over is that when looking at research studies, you actually have to look at how they did their experiment. Because if I take this shoe and I run people at the same speed as running in another shoe, that could yield different results than if I run in this shoe at whatever speed I want to run in versus the other shoe and the speed that I want to run in that shoe. The idea is we're supposed to run faster in this. And so if we're running faster in this, then maybe some of our changes in the way we run is based because partly because we're running faster. And when we control that speed in an experiment, sometimes we actually control the outcome of the experiment too.
So next question I have for you, this is another big biomechanics question. Most of this research, correct me if I'm wrong, is being done on a treadmill.
Yes.
And we don't really race very often on a treadmill.
Unless you're doing your indoor tries.
Right. So could that potentially play a role as well as the running
Oh,
surface?
oh,
And
totally. You know, the treadmill is a great model overall to study running. And some of our instruments really need to have someone running in a certain space in order to do the measurements. Or for example, measuring VO2, that's best done while using a metabolic cart. It's an expensive piece of equipment. You can't put it, you know, it's not easy to make it mobile, to follow someone running. And so having someone run on a treadmill to get physiological measures makes a lot of sense. And sometimes with our biomechanical measures, it's the same thing. But we also know running on the treadmill is different than running over ground. How much different? Again, there's a number of things that go into play with that. Sometimes it's just subtle differences depending on what we're looking at, and sometimes they're major differences. Vertical oscillation can be one. You can actually have very different vertical oscillation on the treadmill versus running over ground. And sometimes this is a funny phenomenon. Of one study I did, we were actually looking at what happened with our shock attenuation, which I mentioned earlier, when you ran faster. Now, classic model of running faster over ground is stride frequency pretty much stays the same for a while, and then it just picks up right at the end to reach that peak speed. Well, running over ground, you tend to, or excuse me, yeah, running over ground, your stride length will increase, and then it will plateau. That's the typical model that we talk about with running and stride length and stride frequency. Well, we actually did an experiment where we relied on that model, and what we we came up with something totally different. And what we saw on running on the treadmill, when you reached those max speeds, your stride length kept going up and your stride frequency kept going up. And so what was happening was people were learning quickly to run faster on a treadmill. They just need to jump up higher and
yep,
let the treadmill move underneath them. And so it
that's
totally
how you win
blew
the
up.
indoor triathlons.
Yeah, it totally blew up our experiment in terms of what we were trying to do. But and we've since documented this with some neat running over ground and running on the treadmill that you run differently and your stride length and stride frequency relationships end up being a little bit different if you're over ground or on the treadmill.
So I think this is so fascinating because this kind of goes into another talk I heard a coach was talking about with helping his athletes decide what shoes.
Yeah.
And they were talking about performance is what matters. And
Hmm.
performance outside, these were people on a track. So performance on the track matters. So he's like, well, why don't we just do like 3K time trials in different shoes?
Yeah.
Like, I don't need a VO2 max. I don't need a lab. I don't need just, we're just going to do 3K trials. And these people that could run big distances, right? So,
Hmm.
you come in a few days and you switch the order of the shoes
Yep.
and whatever one they're fastest in, that's what matters because that's what we care about.
That's right.
They don't give gold medals for the highest VO2 max or the best running economy. They
Hmm.
give gold medals for who
Hmm.
wins.
Yep.
And I just love the practicality of that and the fact that they weren't on a treadmill. They're like, this is the environment we're racing on.
Hmm.
And when the athlete comes around and they're like, oh my gosh, like I was doing 242 per K in this shoe, and in that shoe, I'm doing 250 per K.
Right.
That's all that really matters. And then
Hmm.
they were adding into that the psychological component as well, right? Because they did it on the track. And
Hmm.
having all these two running on a treadmill, it just can conflate the results in
Hmm.
the real world.
Yeah. No, totally. And a lot of times we talk about this 4% improvement. Well, it depends on really what we're talking about when we're looking at 4%. Most of those studies are talking about a 4% improvement in running economy.
Right.
What that means is that's how much your oxygen you're consuming for a given speed. But if you stay at that speed and you're just 4% more economical, you're still going to run the same speed because the way the experiment's set up.
Yeah.
And so your time for a 5K is going to be exactly the same. But you would just get done and
Yeah.
you'd have, oh, well, that was more economical. And so what you're speaking to is trying to understand the influence of a shoe on speed is the deciding factor in terms of which shoe to pick.
And ultimately that's what matters, right? So
Yeah.
it's obviously it's the Tour de France time right now. And obviously bike manufacturers every year come out and this is so much more aerodynamic, this one, this
Mhm.
one, this one. Well, if you're winning all of your races,
Yeah,
does
right.
it matter if 1 or 2% more
Mhm.
aerodynamic in the wind tunnel? Like probably not, right?
No.
You're on the winning bike.
Mhm. No, totally. Yeah. And it's the same thing with the shoe. And so, you're talking about comfort and the psychology of it. That's an important factor because one of the things that we've have landed on in terms of recommending shoes is they need to be comfortable. That's
Yeah.
terrible. That's not a biomechanical term. It's not a physiological term, but it's a psychological term. And you said this earlier in our talk tonight, is that if you don't enjoy running in those shoes, you have pain or it's just not enjoyable, you're not going to stick with running. And so you've got to find shoes that are comfortable. And I remember, coming off the bike and I knew the shoes I had at the time, I was looking forward to running and I couldn't wait to run and because it was comfortable and I think that is an important part.
No, no, I totally agree, that is a big part of it. So let's go to the kind of the last question. Basically, is he asked me like, if so, what is it like? What is a different technique? What ultimately happens when we put on the carbon shoes? And there's a few things that we can look at. So does foot strike change? Does stride length change? Does cadence change? And the truth of the matter is all of these things can change slightly.
Yep.
You know, I know when I put on my carbon shoes, personally, my cadence goes up,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know why. It might be a psychological thing. I'm on these. I They're definitely lighter than my training shoes, so I wonder if that's a natural thing, or
Yep.
it's a little bit lighter. Um, but for me, or it could be the stiffness. They're a
Mm-hmm.
little stiffer. So, but for me, like because I track my cadence pretty regularly when I run, and I've noticed it's about 2 or 3 steps per minute faster on average when I wear the carbon shoes. So, what are your thoughts around kind of the like the foot strike, stride length, cadence, that kind of stuff?
No, I think you're spot on with that. And anytime you change shoes, you end up changing the way you run. I did come across a study where it wasn't the main crux of the study, but they did ask the subjects if they could tell the difference between the two shoes. And the two shoes that they were using looked identical. One had a carbon plate in it and the other did not, but everything looked the same. The foam was the same, the uppers were the same, everything. And out of I think they did, oh, I don't remember how many subjects it was, but it may have been like 20 subjects. Only one person was able to correctly identify the
Oh
pairs of
wow.
shoes. And so this is how the brain operates is and the subjects ran differently in the two pairs of shoes. So it wasn't based upon their correct perception of what the shoe was. There was something that the brain's detecting that drove changes in the shoe in one shoe versus the other shoe. And so you're spot on that it's not always easy to predict what someone's going to do, but it could be all those things, and it could be those things in different directions for different people.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, because yeah, it's multifactorial, right?
Hmm.
If let's say my cadence goes up, well, my stride length's going to go down,
Right, right.
right? Like
Unless you change speed.
unless I change speed. But if
Right.
but if all things are equal, that there so
Hmm.
yes. So looking at it, my stride length does go down when I'm in the carbon shoe,
Hmm.
but I tend to run faster.
Right, right.
So maybe the stride length stays the same, and my cadence goes up, and that's where I run faster.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting, and I love the fact that we're trying to tie the biomechanics and the physiology together,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? Like there's biomechanical changes that are ultimately making changes in physiology. Like
Right.
to me, this is fascinating because you're kind of a crossover guy, right? You're a biomechanist, exercise physiologist. There's not
Hmm.
many of people that are kind of have that expertise like you, and and this is one of the areas where we're really seeing an intersect.
Well, and here's the interesting thing about what you just said is that I saw a study where uh, the two different shoes, and this is actually the same study I'm referring to, the running economy was the same running in the two shoes, but there are biomechanical differences in the gait. And so one of the conclusions was, oh, the adjustments that people were making was resulting in the same running economy. And so again, it wasn't based upon anyone's knowledge because they weren't correctly identifying one shoe or the other, but yet their brain was able to detect something and then made some changes to the gait, but it resulted in the same running economy. So just a weird phenomenon that ends up happening.
I haven't seen the literature on this, but have you seen anything where they've taken somebody that has run maybe for a few years in the carbon shoes
Not yet, no. Yeah,
and
yeah,
then looked at them, hey, let's bring you back to those old shoes?
yeah. Well, I think that's where I'm seeing people talk about as well as in terms of should you be training in carbon shoes, super shoes, or should you not be? And that we don't have research on that yet because the shoes are too still new to the sport.
So the answer, I've had people that I coach ask me the question, and the answer is if it makes you happy to run in them,
I like that. I like that.
then run in them, right?
Yeah, right.
Because well, early on, we the myth was that hey, the shoes broke down really easily, and it
Hmm.
was like you're spending $300 on shoes that are only last you two races. What
Yeah,
we're seeing now is people are putting 500-600 kilometers on these
yeah,
shoes, and they're
right,
only degrading 1 or 2%.
right.
They're actually lasting way longer than the EVA foam.
Hmm.
So if you're looking at like the longevity of a shoe, it actually might be pretty good. And we've talked about it many times. Like the change can be good and change can be bad,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And so if you like running in them and especially if you're relatively injury free and everything's going good, keep going with it.
Yeah. Hmm. Oh, totally. And I think
I would just think it would be, sorry, John,
no, 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 no.
go ahead.
There's just a funny lag. It's just
You got a lot.
um, but yeah, I think anecdotally, talking about how the shoes may influence people at different ages is important because anecdotally, I'm hearing older athletes, older runners in particular, talking about the benefits of running in the super shoes as a way to keep running.
Yeah, and that's another big piece, right? Is if that one of the ideas of these shoes is they attenuate more of the shock,
Hmm.
right? So less shock goes up the system. Well, if you can run more miles
Yeah,
healthy, well, then that's winning, right?
it's a good thing.
There's one athlete I coach. She's had foot problems for years,
Hmm.
tried all sorts of different shoes, and this was forefoot problems. And
Hmm.
we put her in these shoes, hasn't had a problem since.
Right.
And so she should train in them all the time,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? Because the limiter was always the pain in her foot.
Yeah.
The pain's gone, like winning, right? Like
Hmm. Yeah.
absolutely winning. So I think as long as we titrate up, and I think you mentioned this many times, as long as we slowly bring
Yeah.
ourselves into change,
Hmm.
I think that personally, I don't think there's anything wrong with training in them.
Yeah. No, I
But
love it.
I would add the caveat, don't go out and trail run in them because that high stack is very dangerous and
Right.
there's very little heel counter support.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like for example, like I'm rubbing it in again. I was running on the beach. I don't run in them on the beach
Mm-mm.
because the beach already has a lot of it's
Yeah.
soft,
Hmm.
and I don't want to add more softness to the system because I know one of the things that'll happen is my body will try and make myself stiffer,
That's right.
and I don't want that much change. So I think surface does matter when you're,
Hmm.
but definitely don't trail run in them, please.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. Trail running's entirely there's a lot of differences there. But yeah, and I think if you race in uh, super shoes, it is important to at least run some in your those super shoes before your race because you're going to run differently, and so you need to let the body adapt to those shoes and figure that out.
So my advice for people on this one is you should be in those shoes for your long run.
Hmm.
So if you do one long run a week and anything that's fast. So any intervals that you're going to do, put those on. Long run, put them on. And then if you don't want to be in them all the time, let's say, then the other runs
Hmm.
for your regular training shoe.
Yeah.
That'd be my advice.
I love it. And I'll tell you, actually, benefits of teaching this topic. I'm doing that class right now on biomechanics of endurance performance. And one of the students found a study that demonstrated that people who rotated their shoes to different models and different brands ended up having a lower risk of overuse injury over time. And
Yep.
I'm like, yes, that's finally the evidence that we need to see is that it's okay to change shoes. And this speaks to things that we're talking about here is as you change those running shoes out, you're going to run a little bit differently. Well, that variability is probably healthy, not too much variability. And so by changing shoes on a regular basis, maybe you increase that amount of variability that's healthy.
Oh man, I just love this topic. So I know we're near the end of the hour, but I want to just share something that's been going through my brain. And I really want your opinion on this. So my thought for this is going off of biking, is that I should change my saddle position slightly every ride.
Mm, mm-hmm,
Like 1 millimeter up, 1 millimeter down, 1 millimeter forward, 1 millimeter
mm-hmm.
back. And so I gain more of a range because I know
Right,
when I race, I move around a little bit and I
right, right.
change position. And I think we get really caught into cycling, especially. Oh, it's everything is a millimeter. Oh, your
Right.
saddle's a millimeter too high, too low,
Yeah.
and I want to try and gain range
Mm-hmm.
where I can excel in rather than dial the range in. Okay, there. I want to leave you with that. What do you think?
I love the idea. It's amazing how that's hard to actually incorporate within cycling. And it, no, I think you're spot on. And I think what we talked about last episode was the difference between tri bike and road bike, and
Yep.
that may be too big of a gap that you introduce that way. But trying to get to that gap by doing these micro changes, I love the idea. Uh,
So that's what I'm doing right now. By the way,
oh, I
I've
love it.
I've already decided I'm doing this,
Yeah,
and what I'm doing right now is I'm just changing saddle height.
yeah, yeah.
That's the first thing, and I'm just going a millimeter up, millimeter
Hmm.
down,
Yeah,
millimeter and a half up, millimeter and a half down,
yeah.
and I really think there's going to be some benefit to this,
Well,
and I've never seen anything in the literature about it,
mm-mm.
but it's just kind of what the Ted is experimenting on
I
himself
love it.
because the
Well,
theory is there.
I love it. Well, back in the day, there was a saddle called, I think it was called the Power Stroke. And what it was is you had a switch that you mounted on your handlebar that was a wire connected to your saddle, and you could slide that saddle forward or backwards while you were
Yeah.
riding. And the idea was that in certain types of flats or maybe going uphill, you wanted the saddle in one position or the other. And I don't know whatever happened to that, but it certainly didn't stick around. So it's right. Maybe we need to reinvent that type of saddle.
Well, in cycling, they have mountain bikes have dropper posts,
Yeah, yeah,
so you
yeah. Right,
change the
right.
height. And then there was a professional cycling race. I can't remember what it was. It was a year and a half or 2 years ago, and I can't remember who it was, but they won the race and they were using a dropper post in cycling,
Mm,
road cycling. And so I really got to think about like why is it that cycling like oh if you're a millimeter off you're going to get this knee pain and
yeah, yeah.
a millimeter this way you're going to get this back pain. I'm like our bodies are more robust than that, and I think the problem is we get stuck in one position. So
Well,
that's my experiment. I'll let you know how it goes.
I think your hypothesis is right on because the problem of why changing your saddle height a millimeter or your cleat in the wrong direction is because we've got so many pedal strokes with a very tight stroke, a pedal
Yep.
stroke. And so we don't have a lot of variability that's introduced to the system. So when I'm dreading right now, I got to replace my cleat. And I know if I get it off just a little bit, it's going to be like, it's going to show up as a knee pain somewhere because I don't have a lot of variability in that pedal stroke now. So any change is going to be too much change. So now let me end with this point too, because this is part of the National Geographic articles. I advocate being in bare feet as much as possible because that is also introducing that variability to gait. So around the house, I'm in bare feet. I'm outside walking around in bare feet. But when you start coming to running, pick the right tool, and a shoe is nothing more than a tool.
Yep. I'll add one last piece. And if you can do it safely, I actually really am a proponent of doing some barefoot running
Yep.
in short increments,
And yep.
you
And
know, like
on the right surface, on
on
different surfaces even. So
on
yep.
grass or on
Hmm.
some turf somewhere.
Yep.
Not a lot. I'm saying like, you maybe you do 400 yards
Yep.
just once again to train the system and to train the musculature within the foot, because
Hmm.
what we're doing with these shoes is we're really controlling a lot and not allowing
Yep.
for the intrinsic musculature of the foot to develop.
Hmm.
And so no, I'm a big fan of that. I'm a big fan of like balance training without shoes
Hmm. Yep.
on.
Yep.
I think that those are all really relevant things. So no, I'm glad you brought that up because I think
And
it's
kids should be in bare feet as much as possible.
agreed.
Yeah, they get dirty feet, but it's good. All right, man. Well, good talking.
Sorry about the connection tonight. Hopefully next week will be a little better.
No, no, it was just there was just a couple places that that the bits were flying back and forth and getting melted halfway there.
All right. Okay, well, hey, have a good weekend. Try and eat a lot of ice cream to stay cool, okay?
I picked up some ice cream today. All right, good
Awesome.
talking.
Okay, bye.